Hi, I'm Hannah Carter. On New Year's Eve, I knocked on my mother's door and asked if there was a spot for me at the table. She laughed and said I was just a guest. That night changed everything. If you've ever been left out when you should belong, share your story in the comments. I raised my hand and knocked on the familiar wooden door, the sound hollow against the cold night. Snow lay thick on the steps, crunching beneath my boots as I shifted my weight, unsure whether to stay or turn back. "Is there a spot for me at the table?" I asked. My voice barely carried over the wind. Linda laughed, sharp, effortless. "This table is for the real family. You're just a guest." She leaned against the door. Each step left a clean imprint, already beginning to disappear. The cold burned my cheeks. Streetlights reflected off the ice, flashing across my face like something mocking. The wind chased me, tugging at my scarf. I didn't stop. "Happy New Year," a neighbor called from across the street. I nodded without looking up. The words felt foreign in my mouth. Laughter drifted from behind the door I had just left. Muffled, familiar, close enough to hurt. Linda's voice blended easily into it, unbothered. That ease made everything feel almost absurd. A bird cawed somewhere in the distance. I let out a short, bitter laugh. Maybe the universe had a sense of irony. I had asked for a place at the table, and apparently the answer was no. Not tonight, not ever, at least by their rules. By the time I reached the sidewalk, the wind had picked up, scattering snow in restless spirals. Fireworks popped somewhere far away. Horns blared. The city was celebrating, alive and loud, while I passed through it unnoticed, a spectator to everyone else's joy. At my apartment building, I fumbled with my keys, fingers numb. The door finally clicked open. Warm air spilled out, carrying the familiar smell of old carpet and heating oil. I stepped inside and leaned against the door for a moment before moving on. There was no relief, no victory, just the quiet realization that something irreversible had been set in motion. I dropped my bag, kicked off my boots, and pulled my laptop toward me. If the night wasn't going to let me belong, I would at least let it be heard. Marcus Rivera was already there, adjusting the lights. "You're going to be fine," he said. "Just speak. People connect with honesty." He tilted the camera slightly. "Eyes level. Don't hide." I hesitated, then nodded. "On New Year's Eve," I began, my voice unsteady. "I knocked on my mother's door. I asked if there was a spot for me at the table. She laughed and told me I was just a guest." The words came easier after that. The snow, the streetlights, the laughter behind the door. I didn't soften anything. I didn't need to. When the recording ended, I uploaded it. The progress bar crawled forward, then it went live. Notifications flooded in, supportive messages, cruel ones, and a few so absurd they made me laugh despite myself. One comment stood out. "Congratulations, now the whole world knows you don't belong at the table." I leaned back and let out a slow breath. It stung, but there was truth in it too. The irony was almost impressive. The door behind me was closed. Snow continued to fall outside, indifferent. And somewhere between rejection and being seen, I understood this much. The table that turned me away had forced me to build another one. Another message arrived from an unfamiliar number. "Your mother's family is talking about this. You know they never understood you." My jaw tightened. The world had started to notice, and the ripple was already forming. Marcus leaned against the edge of the desk. "People will react, some good, some bad. You're not going to fix them all. Just be real." "Real feels like a liability," I muttered, half to him, half to myself. "Then make it a controlled one," he said, smirking. "And remember, even liability can teach people something if it hits hard enough." I closed my laptop for a moment, looking at the tiny apartment that had suddenly become a stage. The snow outside continued to fall, indifferent, and somewhere between the falling flakes and the glowing notifications, I felt the tiniest shift. The story was out. I didn't have control over how it landed, but for the first time, it wasn't trapped in me alone. A message blinked again, short and to the point. "Wow, didn't think this would go public." The irony wasn't lost on me. What had been so painfully private was now visible, dissected by eyes that didn't care about context or sentiment. I leaned forward, scrolling through the comments. One after another, snippets of misunderstanding, support, and curiosity. Some were sharp, cruel in their phrasing, but I found myself quietly smirking. Maybe being ignored at a table wasn't the worst fate if it came with an audience bigger than I could have imagined. The screen glowed faintly as I typed a brief reply to a supportive viewer, thanking them without over-explaining. The air in the apartment felt lighter, a small space reclaimed in the middle of chaos. I closed the laptop finally, allowing a slow exhale to leave me. Outside, the city's noise continued, distant fireworks marking the arrival of a new year. But within these four walls, the snow and the night had become a backdrop for something I could own. Notifications continued to blink, reminders that the world had started listening. I rubbed my hands together, shaking off the last of the cold, and prepared to see where the story would go next. My phone buzzed while I was making coffee, the screen lighting up with a number I didn't recognize. "This is Rachel Hayes from Boston Weekly," a firm voice said. "I saw your video. Would you consider an interview about the child left out of the table?" The words hit with a strange mixture of absurdity and inevitability. The quiet hum of the refrigerator filled the pause, the mundane contrast making the moment almost surreal. Sure," I said, keeping my voice steady. "When were you thinking?" Rachel offered a few slots over the next week. I agreed without committing too much. Hanging up, I sank onto the couch. The city outside continued its own celebrations, indifferent to the way one evening had shifted everything. Marcus leaned against the desk, smirking at my expression. "Look at you, famous in a week. Did the universe not get the memo that you're socially allergic?" I rolled my eyes. "I don't want fame. I just want to explain myself without causing more chaos." He adjusted the tripod. "You're going to have to explain. People are already talking, and unfortunately, chaos has a better PR agent than anyone else right now." Checking my phone, I noticed notifications piling up. A small local blog had already written about the video. Headlines like, "Boston Teen Opens Up About Family Exclusion" filled my feed. Members of my mother's extended family had begun commenting, questions and whispers spreading like wildfire. Some sounded harmless. Others carried doubt, replaying old memories I didn't even know were public knowledge. A black humor thought flickered. If this were a game of Monopoly, I was finally allowed to own property, but only the one with jail and taxes built in. "Congratulations, world," I muttered. "Now you can all know what it feels like to be ignored formally." Marcus handed me a notebook. "They'll ask the questions they think matter. You decide what answers they deserve. Keep some facts private, the rest, you own." I flipped through the pages, seeing lines I'd scribbled to steady myself. One evening had expanded outward, spreading like cracks through ice, touching people I'd never meant to reach. "They'll want details," Marcus continued. "Her reaction, who was there. Don't volunteer more than you intend. And keep a few one-liners ready. Humor helps, but it has teeth." "I can do careful," I muttered, twirling the pen. Not sure about humor. "You'll learn fast. The world doesn't care about delicacy. Give them something solid without being cruel." I nodded, setting the notebook down. Every word he offered felt like balance, not rescue. That was enough. Later that afternoon, distant relatives called, polite voices masking quiet interrogation. Had I exaggerated? Was that really how it happened? Each conversation tightened the knot in my stomach, but I stayed even, offering facts and nothing more. I refused to speculate. Between calls, I checked social media. The clip had traveled farther than the neighborhood. So she really got kicked out? That's harsh. At least now everyone knows who's emotionally constipated in the Carter household. I laughed quietly, darkly. Marcus glanced over, raising an eyebrow. "See? First punchline. Humor's already saving you." I shook my head, smirking despite myself. If absurdity didn't carry me, the weight would crush me. The mix made survival possible. By evening, Rachel called again to confirm the interview. I agreed, rehearsing my opening lines in my head. The apartment settled into preparation mode. Tripod adjusted, notes spread, camera charged. Another headline blinked onto my screen. Teen tells the tale of being left out at the family table. Sympathy and suspicion warred in the comments. My mother's name appeared, her image quietly questioned. Marcus leaned back. This is where you realize the dominoes are already falling. You don't stop them, you guide them. I exhaled. The interview wasn't an ending. It was a doorway, one that could lead somewhere worse or somewhere honest. All right, I said, standing. Let's do it. One step at a time, he replied. And remember, the world's taste in drama is terrible. Your job is just to survive it without disappearing. I marked the date on the calendar. The talk show was coming. Pressure settled in, but beneath it, a thin line of strategy formed. I would go, I would speak, and I would watch how far the ripple traveled. The segment aired early evening. My phone erupted immediately. Messages from strangers, friends, and distant relatives blurred together into one relentless stream. The host introduced me with a practiced smile, replaying the clip of me at the door. Laughter and murmurs followed, disbelief tangled with curiosity. I focused on my voice, telling it plainly, without decoration. Calls came in from Linda's acquaintances, distant cousins, old neighbors, voices edged with judgment, disguised as concern. Are you sure that's exactly how it went? One asked politely. Yes, that's exactly how it went, I said, keeping my voice even. Nothing added, nothing removed. Emails poured in as well. Some were supportive, sharing sympathy or similar experiences. Others were biting, dissecting every perceived flaw in my story or delivery. A few leaned into sharp humor. One message stood out. Who needs a real table when the whole world can watch your seat being empty? I paused, letting it land. It stung, but there was also relief in the absurdity. Being broadcast, scrutinized by strangers, carried a surreal comedy. Life had a taste for dark punchlines. Marcus leaned back, scrolling beside me. At least your audience is larger than your family table ever was, he said, smirking. If this is survival, consider it a masterclass. I let a small smile slip, grim but precise. The world had chosen to witness my embarrassment, and there was nothing to do but move with it. The commentary spread beyond social media. Local blogs picked up the segment, and the story traveled across forums and news feeds. Each repost added pressure, forcing me to manage the narrative carefully. Any misstep could be misinterpreted or weaponized. My phone rang. Rachel Hayes again. The segment's getting traction faster than expected, she said. Prepare for follow-ups and possible live reactions. Live reactions? The weight of it settled. Another message arrived from an old family friend. I had no idea it went this far. Linda never mentioned leaving you out. The contradiction tightened the air. Whispers spread. Questions turned toward my mother. I stayed centered, choosing words carefully. Between interviews, I scrolled past the black humor. Virtual humiliation has better reach, one comment read. It stung, but I acknowledged it aloud. Marcus chuckled. If life gives you an audience, at least entertain them while surviving. I typed brief replies where needed. Everything felt measured now. What began with some from viewers, others from distant relatives resurfacing. Calls followed, polite but loaded. Are you sure you presented this correctly? One voice asked. Yes, I replied evenly. I'm sure. Social media erupted with shares and memes, twisting the story beyond my control. Support and criticism decide what to answer and what to ignore. Extended family members had known, had whispered among themselves, yet chosen to stay silent. Shock hit in stages. The email outlined patterns of exclusion, subtle but consistent, and included attachments with conversations, notes, and invitations that had been withheld or altered. The image of Linda shifted from a casual, controlling figure to something calculated, deliberate, and coldly precise. I reread the message twice. Each line revealed another layer of her strategy, how she had influenced decisions, spun narratives, and positioned herself as the moral center while everyone else, including distant relatives, complied silently. A small, dark part of me smirked. The universe did enjoy irony. If manipulation were an art, my mother had painted a masterpiece, and I was finally being handed the brush. Calls began almost immediately. Journalists from local outlets wanted follow-ups, questions lined up about the extent of family involvement. Some asked for documents, others sought interviews. Social media ignited as old clips resurfaced, looping the initial incident into renewed public scrutiny. The story no longer belonged to me alone. The web had widened, and the threads touched every corner of the household. Marcus leaned on the desk, glancing at the notifications piling on my screen. "Looks like someone finally opened Pandora's box," he said, raising an eyebrow. "More like Pandora handed me a brick," I muttered. The irony of it made a bitter laugh escape. Suddenly, the power she had wielded in private was being mirrored publicly. Yet this time, I had the chance to redirect it. I sifted through the attachments, seeing patterns in the exclusions, the micro-manipulations, the emotional nudges that had kept me compliant for years. "People are watching closely." I smiled, darkly amused. Messy was an understatement. The term felt almost quaint compared to the labyrinth of influence and deceit that had governed my life. Social media reactions grew intense. Some praised me for exposing the truth, while others debated, questioned, and second-guessed. Comments carried a mixture of admiration and sarcasm. One remark read, "Turns out the family table was really just an invisible VIP section." I shook my head at the absurdity. Humor in the dark moments had always been my saving grace, and it came again now, skewering the situation with perfect. The environment had transformed. What began as a private exclusion had escalated into a network of power and narrative manipulation, and now public exposure threatened to destabilize Linda's carefully curated image. The leverage had shifted, but the stakes remained high. More revelations followed. Documents from extended family hinted at subtle cover-ups, selective sharing of events, and whispered instructions to support my mother's version of reality. Each piece built a damning mosaic of strategy and deceit, revealing the extent of control she had maintained. I took a moment to let it sink in, letting the dark humor settle across the chaos. One email read, "Congratulations, Hannah. You just turned private family drama into a citywide spectacle." The phrasing was almost cruelly witty, but I let myself appreciate the precision of it. The world had chosen sides in an unwittingly comic fashion, and I could navigate that absurdity with awareness. The realization emerged gradually. I now had information, proof, and the public eye subtly aligned with me. The opportunity to regain control existed, but so did risk. Any misstep could escalate the fallout, exposing me or misrepresenting the story. I gathered all the documents, labeling and cross-referencing each one. Marcus suggested a plan: prioritize what to disclose, anticipate counter-arguments, and maintain composure under scrutiny. Timing and clarity are everything, he reminded me. And yes, even dark punchlines can help deflate tension if you wield them carefully. I typed a brief note to a journalist seeking verification. Facts only, no embellishment, no commentary. The narrative had to remain mine, deliberate and deliberate alone. As evening fell, I realized the contours of the next steps. Public perception, legal advice, and strategic disclosure formed a complex equation. The leverage had shifted. The playing field was wider, unpredictable, but within reach. Notifications continued to ping. The world was attentive, and the ripple effects of exposure demanded calculated moves. I leaned back in my chair, reviewing the documents and messages, planning the next step. For the first time in years, I felt the possibility of asserting authority over the story. Remember, you're guiding the narrative. Not everyone will like it, but that's irrelevant. Facts first. She had orchestrated silence for years, but now messages praised the composure, others dissected the statement. Comments highlighted the cleverness, the sting, the truth wrapped in levity. The dark irony resonated widely. People recognized the subtle point that exclusion could now be viewed publicly, framed with both gravity and sharp wit. Extended family members began sending messages, some cautiously supportive, others offering inquiries masked as concern. Their tone suggested they had taken notice of the dynamics they had once ignored. The shift in attention worked in my favor, placing additional scrutiny on Linda and loosening her control over the household narrative. Marcus whispered, "The balance is tipping. You're in command now, but it's still delicate." I exhaled, allowing myself a faint grin. Years of being silenced, dismissed, and manipulated had led to this moment where facts, strategy, and timing intersected perfectly. The leverage was mine to wield, yet it required precision. Calls from media outlets continued. Journalists wanted follow-ups, and I responded with calculated brevity, avoiding speculation and personal attacks. Every statement reinforced the truth without leaving openings for misrepresentation. A message blinked on the phone, short and sharp. "Hannah, watched the segment. Clever way to handle it." The sender remained anonymous, but the note confirmed that the balance had shifted perceptibly in my favor. I reviewed the emails from Linda's associates. Their tone had softened, uncertainty creeping into the subtext. The public exposure had begun its subtle dismantling of the facade she had carefully constructed over decades. Dark humor punctuated the chaos. One comment read, "Who knew a missing chair at the family table would go viral? Finally, the seat of power is transparent." I couldn't suppress a smirk. Even in tension, the absurdity was oddly comforting. The public eye could be weaponized with precision, and the irony was sharp and satisfying. By evening, the network updates confirmed viewership had spiked, and the clips were being discussed across multiple platforms. People began analyzing behavior, parsing statements, and debating ethics. The narrative had moved beyond my initial control, but landed squarely in my influence, guided by careful disclosures and precise messaging. Marcus packed up his notes, leaning back against the counter. "You've carved space in the chaos. Use it. The story is yours now." I nodded, fingers drumming lightly on the desk. The next steps would involve continued strategic management, but the momentum was in my favor. Linda's visibility had increased under scrutiny. Family support, silent or otherwise, tilted toward me, and the audience had absorbed the dual narrative of exclusion and assertive reclamation. The day ended with a sense of purposeful motion. Messages still pinged, but I could plan, respond, and act without reactive panic. The story's trajectory was clear. Power had shifted, and I held the levers. The first message appeared mid-morning, simple and abrupt. "Hannah, can we talk?" No explanation, no attempt at context, just the acknowledgement that the story had reached Linda. I didn't reply. Emails from journalists and viewers slowed to a trickle. The segment had aired, the narrative had settled, and the public interest had shifted elsewhere. My mother's name lingered in comments, muted by facts I had presented, the facade she had maintained unraveling subtly but completely. Calls from family members ceased. Extended relatives who had once whispered now stayed silent or offered tentative support. The leverage I had gained over months of exposure had solidified into quiet authority. Every interaction now carried the knowledge that boundaries had been restored. Marcus walked past my desk, shaking his head at the calm that had replaced the previous chaos. "Seems like the universe finally filed everything under lesson learned," he said, his tone carrying the faintest edge of dark amusement, or at least temporary embarrassment. I smirked. The irony wasn't lost. Years of exclusion and manipulation distilled into a single moment of recognition, public yet dispassionate. A bitter punchline hanging between us, almost celebratory in its absurdity. The apartment felt larger, unclaimed by tension. I returned to my work as project coordinator, logging tasks, responding to messages, and managing deadlines. Life required continuity, and I embraced it without distraction. The desk became my anchor, routine my affirmation. Weekends held new activity. I signed up for a ski class, the brisk cold a reminder that challenge and control could coexist. Each session offered a blend of risk and precision, a mirror to the careful navigation I had maintained through the exposure. Mentoring sessions followed. Young professionals seeking guidance logged into our virtual meetings, asking questions about career choices, problem solving, and handling difficult dynamics. I shared practical advice, keeping personal drama minimal, but using examples that reflected real obstacles. The influence extended subtly, a quiet reclaiming of authority through action rather than confrontation. A notification blinked. Instagram, a feature for stories. I hesitated, then uploaded a photo of a modest new. I scrolled through messages from viewers who had followed the saga. Supportive notes, small anecdotes, and subtle humor threaded through the responses. One read, "Better a table of your choosing than one dictated by someone else's rules." I allowed a faint smile. That was the point. Control was restored not through confrontation, but through deliberate choices and clear. The chaos of public exposure had passed, leaving only the methodical, deliberate structuring of my own narrative. A notification pinged again. Another view, a reply to the Instagram story. "Looks like the new year brought the best seat at the table." The humor, subtle and sharp, brought a quiet satisfaction. The absence of spectacle meant that the regained control was stable, enduring. The laptop remained open, notifications muted. I prepared. The words lingered in digital permanence, a private joke for public eyes, a quiet assertion of authority, and a reminder that control could be regained with